We have taken a break due to the retreat last week from our study of the Upanishads, but in particular, we started with Isha Upanishad, although we did give an overview of the Upanishads themselves. So we can start off with the peace prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Mudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. That is full. This is full and complete. The full comes out of the full. Taking the one from the other, the full from full, the full itself remains. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. As we can see from this opening peace prayer, that it is dealing with the subject of Brahman, both immanent and transcendent. That's the beauty of this particular Upanishad. But I want to dwell a little bit on the peace prayer itself, because all the Upanishads will have it. And just to remind you of the basis of the Upanishads themselves. There are two theories about their origin, because they have to be viewed as a discovery in both options. But one is that it is a later discovery. That is, the bulk of the Vedas went before, and then we have afterwards a thoughtfulness that expresses itself as Upanishad. The implication is something very sacred and not to be distributed everywhere. So those who are studying this will need to understand the purport of this peace prayer and the whole understanding of why the Upanishads exist. This is not a philosophy in the Western sense. This is a path to realization containing three things: the deep philosophical principles that it contains. Secondly, the way forward. What is the practical thing that we can do? And thirdly, that from all of these stanzas will come a subject for meditation practice. So all of this must be approached with a sense of reverence. And to set the mood, we repeat these peace prayers. And every Upanishad will have one. And just to remind you, the body of Upanishads is quite huge. In terms of principal Upanishads, maybe there are 24, but those that are absolutely sure and that the great giants of the philosophical schools have made commentaries on, we can say 10 or 12, depending. So we can reduce that for our purposes to 10. We'll probably only be discussing 10 and making reference to the other two. The giants among these Upanishads will be the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, as the name suggests, and the Chandogya Upanishad. But the Isha Upanishad is very small, very short. Just to remind you of how Mahatma Gandhi viewed this. So, firstly, the beauty of this particular Shanti mantra, we shouldn't overlook. It conveys so many different concepts so that it serves itself to be a lesson to us, a philosophical lesson, but also a meditation. It conveys infinity, fullness, completeness, and the utter perfection of Brahman, the absolute, in its infinite perfection, but by the same token, its relationship to the world. And very often, mistake is made in the study of the Vedanta that we're only studying non-dualism. Yes, that is the pinnacle of things, but we have to deal with the manifest world as well. And the beauty of this Isha Upanishad is it tells us both. To put it in familiar language, behind me is a whiteboard, God and the world. That's what it's dealing with. It's also dealing with other things, but that's the umbrella subject. That is the imminence and transcendence, both it's dealing with. Not just one, not just the other, not just one method either. So we'll see that as we go through it, just to remind ourselves, it deals with every possible avenue of spiritual practice you can think of. So the beauty is contained there, and there's nothing more really to be said about it except that there's beauty, because there can be no additions, no subtractions to it. of life has one source, no beginning, no middle, no end. And by contemplating on this supreme, this absolute, this Brahman, as a certainty that stands behind everything, but not just stands behind, it brings us a sense of awe. That's the practical dimension of it. It brings us a sense of wonder, a sense of calmness, a sense of peace to the mind. That is why we repeat these mantras. These are Shanti mantras, in order to bring us an atmosphere of peace, a kind of reflective mood before we even go into the study. So I have to point out, those who are used to studying philosophy, such as Immanuel Kant, Schopenhauer, and all of these entities, Nietzsche, and so on. This is not the kind of study that we are embarking on. The kind of study we're embarking on is taking for granted that we are truly interested in finding out what is the nature of existence itself and how we can apply this in the world. So with these few words about this and the Upanishads in general, we just remind ourselves of this opening stanza, which really lends its name to the Upanishads itself. So, Isha Vashyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat tyanatya tina bunjita ma gritaha kashasvad dhanam. So we can say that all of this, but it begins off, of course, as all stanzas should begin off, with our word Om. And Om is a sound symbol that embraces everything. All of this, whatsoever moves on this earth, should be covered by the Lord, or is covered by the Lord. So not just is its origin, its root, but it also tells us that wherever we look, we should catch the clue. There's nowhere we can look where this entity is not. Bear in mind the opening peace prayer. This is full, that is full. There's no difference between the transcendent and the immanent. One is one aspect of it, the other is another aspect of it. And then whatever moves, there is nothing you can think of, really, that doesn't move in some way. Even if you take something that is stationary, modern study will tell you that it does move. And you can move it also. But we know that a rock that we see as solid today will be sand tomorrow. There are things which are affecting it. Equally, we can go back into the past and see that what was part and parcel of the earth and the earth's crust and the earth's structure is not how we find it today. Equally, we can see that if we take the evolutionary process, pretty much well established by lining up fossils and creating a fossil record, we can see the change from one thing to another. And then what about going further back? We don't know, because nobody was there to witness any creation event. But what we do know is that we all come from hydrogen. There's only hydrogen which is there, nothing else. And variations of it. Hydrogen, helium, all the light elements are there. And the force acting on it, gravity. And what we call this matter, what we call this hydrogen is electricity. Everything is electricity. But we don't normally think in these terms. And so we have to catch up. We have to catch our gut up. We have to make a revolution in what we instinctively feel. And we start off then by this beautiful statement that is worthy of reflection. We can meditate for hours together on this subject. But it is all covered, enveloped. It is all permeated by this entity. And which entity? The one that lords it over. In other words, the one that is not exactly the material substance, but because of its presence, because of its royal presence, everything else is moving. So it's covered by this Lord and it's protected protecting, and is protecting what? Protecting the internal self. In other words, it's acting like a covering, but it itself is providing the covering. Why cannot we see easily this entity that we call Atman, Brahman, and so on? Is only because things seem to be covered. We make a good reference here to the Bhagavad Gita, which gives us a number of examples. Like fire being covered by smoke, like an infant, a fetus being covered by their womb, like the sun being covered by a cloud, and so it goes on. So things are covered. And what is our endeavor? Our endeavor is to see if we can remove these coverings. So how will we discover this? There's only one formula in all spiritual endeavor, and that is the process of renunciation, the process of detachment. So the first part of the verse grants the Upanishad its name and its theme and so on and so forth. Everything there is enveloped by, and therefore it is hiding. It is hiding the Lord. And the tone of this first verse even, as well as the rest of the Upanishad that follows, is clearly and distinctly to do with this Brahman as everything and the only thing which exists. And once you know yourself as this Brahman, then of what value is any other thing which is not Brahman or not identified in this static way, this entity that does not move while everything else is moving? In other words, not subject to any restrictions of space and time. And for that reason, the closer we get to it, the less importance and significance we have in the other things that I might classify or others might classify as trivial pursuit. That's the practical dimension. By discerning this as the absolute solid reality that never moves, we can become detached from things. Knowing that the ultimate goal, if you want to put that, of any movement and change is actually demise and death. So, whose is this body? Whose is this mind? Whose is this environment? Detachment immediately follows when we understand it doesn't belong to us. We have no claim on it. You ask, whose is the Gaza Strip? Is it Palestinian or Jewish? You can't say which one, because it doesn't belong to anybody. And Sri Ramakrishna gives that beautiful story about two brothers fighting. This is my land, this is my land. He's chuckling, no, my dear fellow, my dear children, it's my land. You have no right to fight over it. It doesn't belong to you. And yet today in modern times, we hear this mantra, oh, it is my body, I can do what I like with it. No, you cannot. You hear this as an argument for things like abortion and so on. Oh, I have the right to do what I like with it. So detachment follows immediately. Now, what value would a drop of water be to the ocean? Is an interesting reflection on this statement and immediately gives us a sense of detachment. Shankaracharya wants to use this particular stanza connected with a style which is suitable for monastic life, that is detachment. The following verse will give us an alternative. So it is a bit like the Martha and Mary story in Christianity. You have Martha and Mary, and Martha is doing all the action. She is doing the service. She's entirely engrossed in that. And Mary is involved in contemplation, sitting at the Lord Jesus' feet. And we're told, actually, that she has chosen the better path in the sense that both require an element of detachment, because any action that we do will be binding. Any action that we do will be a distortion, will be contaminated, because most actions that we do will have self-interest involved. It won't have the sense of detachment, and therefore it will be binding. And so we have to understand The whole universe, every action, every part of the environment, every part of the psyche, the mind, has these three evolutionary components that we call binding elements or gunas. Now, supposing you do all actions and you do it with a sense of detachment, that is, you're not upsetting the equanimity of the mind, then what happens? Is this surely not a way? Is it not the way for the majority? It is. So if we combine the action with mindfulness, and we can add a beautiful dimension to this, we can add a sense of adoration, wonder, and thankfulness, then this becomes the karma yoga of the Bhagavad Gita. So the words used are jaktina bunjitaha, enjoying through renunciation. You have a funny idea about renunciation. Right now, I should mention that there are some who normally attend these talks who are absent because, as we speak, they're involved in community activity. I'd encourage those who can to come along, simply to enjoy this sense of renunciation, but also to enjoy the fellowship of a holy place, and to enjoy also all the facilities that we have very carefully built up for the study of this subject, with the removal of some restrictions in the lockdown. Then what it means is that people of up to 15 in the open air, because we're painting the outside of the building, can come along and enjoy the open air. Somebody asked me, can children come? Yes, children can come. Adults can come, anybody can come. Oh, I can't paint. Who cares? Come to drink in the atmosphere where you can understand these principles in a better way. So I hope to see many of you who can come along today and tomorrow and do the second part of what this is. What is the second part? The second stanza, and we are revising it quite a bit, is Kurvan evaha karmani chijiveset shatam samaha evam tayi nanyetusti na karma lipyate nare. Supposing you want to perform actions. I'm summarizing it because we've gone through this in greater detail in previous sessions. By doing action, supposing you wish to live 100 years, any harm in that? Yes, if all these actions are binding. But living a fruitful 100-year life, 100 years being seen to be a natural lifespan of people in those days, and there's no reason why it should be a full lifespan today, particularly with mechanical parts going on, prosthetics and all the rest of it, with the other parts joining you as a reception committee on the other side. Supposing you want to do that, is there a way? Yes, but do it in a selfless way. So there is a call to action here, practical call to action in this Upanishad. Enlightenment or self-realization can't really be achieved by abandoning any action. Even if you say, I'll shut myself in a cave and do nothing, just bare maintenance of the body is required. We have to go back to the principles contained as a theme in the Bhagavad Gita about this. So we can't escape action by going off to the hills. The only correct way to live is to stay true to one's own actions and be unattached to the results of these, what we call phala, the fruits of these actions. So that is by performing actions in a spirit of renunciation or sacrifice or yajna or selflessness. We perform all the actions. Then one dedicates all actions to one's higher self, Brahman, and there is no binding karma to this. Now again, Shankaracharya gives a slightly different understanding of this, seeing that there are two paths. And so the one path is that path of renunciation, and this is challenged in the commentary itself. So how is it known that the previous verse, that is the first verse, teaches the pursuit of knowledge or contemplation, you may say, for the person of renunciation. And the second one, teaching the path of karma for one who is unable to renounce, majority of humans. And so he answers himself. He says, do you not remember what was pointed out? And what was pointed out in the introductory comments to this Upanishad. And that is that the antithesis between knowledge and karma is irremovable like a mountain. That is, there are two separate paths, but they conjoin because they both have the common theme of true renunciation. And this subject you find picked up also in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. There's a confusion between sannyasa and tyaga. But the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, much of the Bhagavad Gita anyway, and how it begins is to do with this karma yoga. So who would desire to live 100 years, a full lifespan, should do so by performing work. And all this should be covered by the Lord is the theme for it. So doing it, understanding, I don't own anything. And all the energy that is being used is not mine. What a wonderful way of living your life in two possible ways. That all this energy that we can call divine grace is flowing through every single upadi. That means every single modifying adapter. You can put it on the one side. From the relativistic side, it looks like an adapter. Something that is useful and expressive. On the other side, it's a limiting adjunct. Close to this adjunct means joining on to this, as it were, and flowing through in this way. And in that way, when we look at this, we automatically have this sense of detachment. That is called renunciation. Don't think renunciation is going away to a forest or a monastery or a nunnery, nothing like that. You can go away to any of these places and you can still be attached to the baggage that you take, psychological baggage, the habit that you have accumulated through learning. So these two paths are there. Even there, the Taittiriya Aranyaka, says the commentary also, it is said there that renunciation did indeed excel. Yes, nobody else is arguing with that. Renunciation is the key to the life of Jesus. Renunciation is the key to the life of Buddha. Renunciation is the key to Shankaracharya. Renunciation is the key to the Bhagavad Gita. By reciting Gita, 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 says Swami Krishna, you come to Tyagi, 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 a kind of understanding that it is to do with this renunciation. Renouncing the fruits of all your activities because they do not belong to you. Now, the third stanza then is encouraging us, the seeker of one's true entity, true self, as the final goal of human life. See, without the search, life becomes dark, meaningless. It becomes something like a hellish void. And one is pulled here and there by what? By the pulls, the attractions and misunderstandings of what we call our material nature. And then if you ask somebody who has this point of view, what is your purpose? They won't know what it is. If there's no central purpose to the evolutionary process, then does life have any meaning? And then we're suffering because we're living in a limited way, with a short-term purpose to do this or do that, do the gardening, do the housework, succeed in my job, or succeed as a student. Yes, these are no doubt purposes, they're short-term. But is there anything longer term? And if you don't understand that there is some profound, deeper nature in you, then life has no meaning. And yet we think it does because We want to continue perpetuating our existence. So the human goal of life is there, and without the search, then life becomes dark. So how is this brought to us? It's brought to us in this way. So the third stanza, Asurya namate loga andena tamasa vrataha tamste pritya bhikachanti yeke chatmaho janaha. Now, this is quite a controversial thing if you don't understand it properly. All right. This word Asurya has two kinds of origins. So those worlds of devils are covered by blinding darkness. Those people that kill the self go to them after giving up this body. Of course, immediately anybody will say, but the self is immortal, how can you kill it? So obviously it's not meant like that. But the Asurya is appertaining to asuras. And asuras are those who delight only in the physical, including those beings at different or higher levels. What we call the whole group of higher beings in heavens and what have you. You may well be one of them. Once this physical human body goes away, you may also enjoy the fruits of your activities and also be among those in different parallel universes, if you will. There's no reason why you sitting there cannot be sitting in the midst of multi-dimensional existences. But not only that, have they found the truth? No, they haven't. Have you as humans found the truth? No, you haven't. Why haven't you? Because if your delight is in the physical, then clearly you haven't fulfilled your purpose and your goal still remains, eluding you. In this sense, Asurya, and then devoid of light, devoid of something that makes the sun alive is there, and it is Surya. But Asurya is the opposite. So even though these beings may be lit up with life and lit up with, a great deal of the rewards of a moral life, still they haven't received the highest. They haven't gotten to this ultimate realization. And so for that reason, they're in darkness, even though they seem to be, advanced beings. Even in the human structure, that may be so. You maybe find somebody who is enormously successful or popular, having achieved everything that maybe human life has to offer on the material level. But still, they are in blinding darkness because they're still thinking that this material world is the only thing that they have. And it doesn't matter if you follow a religion. Suppose you understand that there's only one reality. Supposing you say that reality is God, then will there be such a thing as ignorance and sin? Not at all. Where will your attention be pitched? It'll be pitched toward that perfection. It makes human flaws impossible. It makes guilt impossible. It makes all of these theological negatives impossible. So please don't say, if you are religious, please don't say that you are a true theist, because it means that on Sundays you're a theist and on weekdays you're an atheist. So those worlds, including this one, of those people who are ignorant, they're covered, the worlds themselves are covered with blinding darkness. And those people that kill the self, that is, that cover the self, in other words, remain in ignorance, go to them after giving up this body into those other worlds of blinding darkness. So the ordinary and the ignorant persons are really called this killers of the self, because they're slaying they're obscurating, they're covering up, they're hiding the true nature of the self with clouds of ignorance. Now then, what is the nature of this entity that we are hiding? So, having understood that those who neglect the spirit, that Atmahano Janaha, what are they destined? Are they destined for joyless, demonic regions enveloped in darkness? What is the contrast? What is the thing that they're hiding? What is this entity that is both immanent and transcendent? So this comes to the third point. There's denial. This now goes beyond the third point. And the third point, point number 4, will be the supreme is immanent and transcendent is the theme. Arijad ekam marso javiyo nanad deva apnuvam purva marsat. Tad davato nyan atyeti tishtat tasmin apo matarisha tadati. The wind, matisha, the thing that is moving. What is the thing that makes things move? Is a good philosophical question. It is the spirit, it is the unmoving that makes something else move. Now here we come across seeming contradiction. It is unmoving, it is the unmoving one. If there are two things that are unmoving, then there has to be a duality. And we only know by contrast. The relative world is only there by contrast. In other words, this world is made from information. What science tells us, this world is made from information. And how do we get the information? There has to be one who is informed and the other thing that is informing. Two things have to be there. So this unmoving one is faster than the mind. But I thought you said it's unmoving. It means there's nothing faster than the mind. The mind thought travels faster than the speed of light. And if you imagine going to the ends of the universe, by the time you get there, already this self is there. It's gone on, as it were, before you. It looks as it has moved before you. It's already there because of this fullness. No matter where you go in space and time, it already precedes you, already there waiting, as it were. Faster than the mind. The senses couldn't overtake it. Now, what do we mean by the senses? And here I want to highlight the word. The word you see is devaha, the senses. The devaha, now you ask people, how many gods are we dealing with? Devas surely mean gods. No. They mean illuminating factors. Things which shed light on something. Don't forget, everything is information. What is giving us information about the world in front of us? The world which is moving, which is changing, which is shifting, which is oscillating, which has a tremor in it. What is that? What reveals it to us? The sense organs that we call Deva. Indriyas, the sense organs. Indra is the chief of the Indriyas. So these are the eyes, the ears, and so on. If you have one sense less, you have less information. We have a story that we told during the weekend of a blind man who adamantly said, I don't care how you describe this world of sunshine and blue sky, it does not exist. What he meant was, it doesn't exist for me. And then the famous story of the blind people examining what is an elephant. Oh, it's like a trunk. It's a trunk, or it's a pillar, or it's a rope, or it's like a plantain leaf. See? So all of them discovered parts and asserted the parts, not understanding the totality, the whole. So It outstrips those who run, though it does those sense organs, and in it the all-pervading air supports the activities of beings. This all-pervading air is termed as this Matarishwa. That is the thing that is moving the air. What is that moves the air? We have to examine that. So it is this moving air that supports everything around it. That's the comparison that is made. And then, of course, we have to reconcile what are these contradictory statements that are being told. Of course, we find now that there is no contradiction when we view it in this way. And then, since the Vedic mantras are untiring in their emphasis, says the commentator, the idea imparted by the previous verse is being stated again. You'll find in the Upanishads where there is something significant that has to be taught. They are tireless in their repetition and doing it from slightly different angles. So let us see, what is that? Now we are examining the fourth stanza, the imminence and the transcendence. And so that carries through to the seventh stanza also. So these verses contain, of course, descriptions of the glories of the Absolute. Remember, I said 3 things we understand: the principle of it, and we understand the practice of it, that is looking at things in a different way, and then we find the meditative aspect of it. And we can only catch that when we view all of these as descriptions of glories of the Absolute, that it is unmoving, yet it is quicker than everything, that it is all-pervading inside and outside and everywhere, and it's like the force that makes the whole universe move. That's the purport of it. Realizing everything within Brahman, which is also the Atman. Don't forget, this principle has to be there, and the self within everything. Realizing there are no two, there's only one. Really understanding that is the ultimate goal. When that dawns, then we have arrived at the goal. All right, so let's have a look at this. Now, we have to understand also that the Supreme is one essence, but it has these 2 natures, as it were: an eternal, immutable entity and an unceasing change. It's stillness and movement, but itself is immovable. This we have to understand. And when we see the moving only and don't register it properly, then this we call ignorance. That's the definition of ignorance. All right. Tadijati tan nayajati tad dure tadvat antike tad antarasya sadvasya tad sadvasyasya bahyataha. It moves not. These 2 natures have to be understood. It is far, but it's near. It is within all this, is also outside all this. Is God inside, or is God an extra cosmic entity beyond the cosmos? Yes and no. It is both transcendent and immanent. And I think I mentioned, I gave you an example, either in this class or some other class, of immanence and transcendence. It's a bit like you have a corporation of glass. You remember that example I gave you? Glass panes getting together saying, we'll ban the sun from shining through us. So these aren't really contradictory statements. They're only apparently contradictory statements. They're not suggestive of any imbalance anywhere, not suggesting of any mental imbalance in the writer. We're struggling to describe what experience is through the limitations of human thought and language. The same struggle comes in modern science also. How can you describe the human being or the human body with something like 30, 35 or more trillion cells in the body? Something like 10 to the power of 24 atoms in the body. That is 10, you see, and all those noughts behind it. So 10 to the power of 24 of a meter is incredibly small. It doesn't look like that. So the Supreme is beyond any categories of thought, is really what this stanza is saying. Thought is symbolic and so cannot conceive of the absolute except through saying what it is not, negations. It is not, this is not, this is not that. And then we come to the absolute, and it's not a void. This mistake is made by some schools of philosophy, that there's nothing at the end of it. It's simply not there. A kind of version of that will be ex nihilo, something's coming from nothing. So Vedanta Deshika, among others, quotes 2 verses to show the distance and intimacy of the Supreme to those who are undevout and those who are devout as well. And it goes on that they indicate 2 sides of the same divine. This has to be brought home, and to make sure it's brought home, we have to understand, okay, what is it inside and what is the practical portion of this now? So this beautiful, beautiful, amazing statement comes, and it is reflected in many other Upanishads. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmyana evana pashyati sarva bhuteshu chapmanam tato na vijugupshati. He, that person that sees all beings in our own self and my own self in all beings, self meaning this principle of Atman, does not feel any revulsion or grief or any reaction, adverse negative reaction toward the world by reason of such a view. Imagine now, so far, all these verses applied to the moral and ethical behavior of the world itself. What a difference it will make. Just pausing with those few stanzas in mind, seeing this unity of existence, how incredible that is. And so therefore, reflecting on it is important, and acting on it is also important. Words without actions, not important. Words without feelings, not important. All of that has to be combined and understood. 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 30, tells us exactly the same thing. He who sees me and all beings in me, I'm never lost to them. And so a person who has this understanding, this Vijayagupsate, has no doubts, none whatsoever. Complete understanding, complete faith, imagine. So, that is, the commentator will say, he who, that is the mendicant or any other spiritual aspirant who wants to be freed, they have to adopt this method. It's a practical method. They have to begin seeing the unmanifest in all beings and ending with that which is immobile, in a rock, in a chair, in a space, as actually Atmani Eva, as not only existing, but existing Atmani Eva in the very self. That is, not seeing them as different from the self. Sarva bhuteshu cha, and in all those beings. So just as I, the soul of the body, which is an aggregate of causes and effects, I'm reading from the commentary here, am the witness of all perceptions, and as such I am the source of its consciousness, and am pure and unconditioned. Similarly, in that very aspect of mind, am I the soul of all, being from the unmanifested and ending with the immobile. So he who realizes the unconditioned self in all beings, thus, by virtue, tataha, of that vision's na vijugupshate, feels no hatred, nor does anyone hate that entity. If we tune into the BBC News or any news broadcast of our choice, we'll see throughout the world, no news is good news. And nowhere do we find this principle being applied. As a result, what suffering we all experience. as a result of this. When to the person of realization, all beings become the very self. We understand that one entity. Then what delusion, what sorrow can there be for that seer of oneness? All that delusion goes and all that sorrow goes. Therefore, all that seeking goes as well. And we can put it in a way, in the self of the man or the person of realization, in which all beings become the self. What delusion, what sorrow can remain for that? And the beautiful statement, seer of oneness, is a beautiful expression, the seer of oneness. So literally, when we go on, we can say, ekatvam anupashyataha, that emphasized there, yasmin sarvani bhutani atmeva bhut vijanataha tatra ko moha kaha shokaha ekatvam anupashyataha. If you know this, then all beings have truly become one with this, with his own self. You won't harm yourself, isn't it? Then what delusion, what sorrow can be to him who has seen this oneness? With a beautiful statement. This moha, this delusion or the veiling of the self, this hiding, this avarana, that goes away. Now, having described then, here's the goal, here's the method also, and here's the reflection on it. Supposing you sit down and immediately now understand through a process of contemplation, there, and then feel, that oneness. And rehearse that time and time again, 100 million, 1,000 times. Then when you go to work, won't you have a different understanding? Will you be blaming anybody? Will you be hating anybody? Will you be reacting adversely to anybody? Will you have a grudge against anybody? Will you wage war with anybody as a nation? None of these things will happen. So we can see here practical philosophy. Practical philosophy that can be applied by anybody because everybody is in the same boat. Same boat, that is, everybody has the following of the senses and deluded in this way and the opportunity to reveal their full potential also. He has filled all, he is radiant, bodiless, invulnerable, devoid of sinews, pure, untouched by evil. He, the seer, thinker, all-pervading, self-existent, has duly distributed through endless years the objects according to their natures. Sa paryacha yagach chukram akayam avranam asnaviram shuddham apapa vidham kavir manisi paribuhu swayambuhu yata tat yatoratan vyadach cha sa divash samabhyaha. It's a beautiful technique for quieting the mind, is realizing that the absolute perfect one, who is not only all-pervading, going back to the first stanza, not only all-pervading, but eternal, immovable, unchanging, but also the supreme seer and thinker, has already created the world such that everything is in its place, running rhythmically, designed as it were, by no mistake. Nothing needs further action on our part of it. So why should we worry? People are in a condition of ceaseless worry and anxiety. Oh, for my studies, somebody is sending me to the Middle East. I'm afraid of people there. I got a message like that today. Or some other thing. Of course, if you wish to worry, there'll be many opportunities for it. I'm sitting here, what if the sky falls in? What if an asteroid comes and blasts all to pieces? People are painting outside. What if somebody falls off a ladder? Well, what if they don't? I often say, when somebody asks a question of a hypothetical nature preceded by what if, well, a hypothetical question requires a hypothetical answer. What if a burglar comes and steals something? What if a policeman comes in after him? I don't know. So we have to leave all those hypothetical questions behind and understand that he is all-pervasive, pure, bodiless, without wound, without sinews, taintless, untouched by sin, omniscient, the ruler of the mind, transcendent, self-existent, duly allotted the respective duties to the eternal years. That is, to the eternal sub-administrative beings, creators. All right. So all that we have. Now, if you look, those who have the 8 Upanishads in front of them, if you look at the huge commentary in connection with this. But here's the first purport of the Vedas is devotedness to knowledge after renouncing all desires. That's the first thing. In the ancient days, the students did it. See, when people all studied in most of their academic studied under these great rishis and teachers. And some rishis were more famous and more competent than others. When these people were studying the practical portion of this. That is, learning to be a good citizen, learning to meditate, learning to contemplate from the very start. Imagine if this was all taught to all the students, along with the 1+1, along with the astronomy and phonetics and all the other things that they used to study. In modern day, you study science, you study, accounting or whatever it is that you're specializing in. Imagine not only if that was occurring, that alongside that, as a fundamental part of the education system, you are learning this oneness of the self. Not just learning it in principle, but learning how to meditate on it. This was the main job of these retreats or ashrams. All right, so I think we stop there and we remember where we stopped because another subject is taken off, that is ignorance and knowledge. And I'll just give you an understanding of what it means. Supposing you are continuing your habit of relating to the world and covering this principle up with your ignorance, then you're really in a world of blinding darkness. Even though you value all the things that are around you in a positive material way, you still don't get it. And as a result, you're reacting badly to the universe and creating pain for yourself and others. Then, supposing you decide that you will delight in knowledge itself, instead of working and at least doing some ritual, at least looking after this world and the next world, at least doing something with a moral and ethical background. And you decide now you're going to an abstract way of thinking. You're going into even deeper darkness. It is much better to do some form of action than to leave it in the theoretical way and start only being an armchair philosopher, you know what I call it. That then denies everything and says, I've looked at this world and my evaluation of it is I'm agnostic about it or atheistic about it. Even more blinding darkness has gone into it. Then supposing you leave it there in a state of darkness, then you have to make a distinction. You have to understand what are the results of different kinds of knowledge. And so these different kinds of knowledge will give you a different result. Knowledge of the ultimate, that is true knowledge, will give you all these things, immortality, truthfulness, etc. And so different types of vidya or knowledge will give you different results. The result of ignorance will be ignorance. The result of the pursuit of knowledge without understanding the real nature of things will leave you ignorant, even though you have pursued this line of knowledge. And to make sure that we understand this, those who are bringing out this Upanishad will say, by the way, we are not saying this. We've heard this from those who are wise. And it's not the sign of a wise person to simply dictate something. But this has been understood by those, even way before us. Knowledge and ignorance, he who knows these two together, true knowledge and the superficial knowledge, they cross death through ignorance, that is, through the superficial knowledge, not understanding that, not laboring on it fully, not emphasizing it. They understand that, and they also understand the true knowledge. If you understand these two things together, this is true knowledge. All right. Then it goes on further, the manifest, the unmanifest, into blinding darkness, and to those who worship the unmanifest, that is, who attribute everything to nature, who are materialists, who are pantheists, who are physicalists. Nature itself is sufficient to explain everything. We don't have to go further and see any expression of Brahman through this. And those who see the material world, that is under the rule of Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic mind, but don't register it in any way to Brahman, the root of the truth. That is true materialists. Those people go into blinding darkness again. So we'll pick these up next week. Now, unfortunately, I haven't given you any time, so I need to I've done all the talking, but we needed to regroup and refresh our memory on these particular stanzas. I'm going to extend the session then a little bit. We give you an opportunity to ask questions or make commentaries.
Swami, could I ask just two questions, please? On the whole area of non-attachment, do you think there's been a misunderstanding in relation to the principle of renunciation and non-attachment, and that's probably confused or limited society's conviction about right action, just as a first point? And secondly, you had talked about Western philosophy as having a very different basis, and I understand that, but I'd love to hear your views on the influence of the Upanishads on the great Western philosophers. So there were just my 2 points.
Well, I'll start with the last one first. Certainly, the Upanishads have influenced, or seem to have influenced, the earliest Greek philosophers, certainly Socrates and so on. And certainly we know that Alexander in his conquest brought Persian, don't forget Persian and Indian philosophy is the same thing, because there were no geographical distinctions in these countries. That much also we knew. And so we find them coming across in Greek philosophy, no doubt about that. But of course, the Greeks were inherently much more cerebral in the sense that they wanted to go into the dialectics of this much more. Don't forget, there were these great opportunities to drink some wine and lounge and talk, and the more the wine flowed, the more detailed and comprehensive and more moodily outrageous some of these discourses went into. So I think there was a real search into the nature of truth, but again, it is this very stanza I've just read that highlights, if you intellectualize things, you're really leading yourself into ignorant rabbit holes, and you won't really get closer to the truth if you leave it on that level. So it requires practice. It requires now meditation. It requires this renunciation. That leads us then to the first part of your question. Has it been misunderstood, this idea of unattachment? In many cultures and many religions, yes. And as far back as the Bhagavad Gita itself. And so if you study the 18th chapter, this whole idea was misunderstood, and misunderstood by later commentators, because when Arjuna and Krishna talk about sannyasa, they have no concept of going into monastic life. Neither of them have it. They had simply detaching from the fruits of your actions and detaching in two separate ways, two different ways. One is to do with seeing that there is a flow, seeing the self in all beings in the self as a flow through all of these limiting agents. That's one way. The other way is seeing the imminence and detaching from the fruits. Both are detachment. But detachment is mental detachment. It's not physical detachment. Physical detachment can occur as a result of the mental detachment. So yes, it has been misunderstood. Throughout the ages, it's been misunderstood. Let's take Christian monasticism. It's been misunderstood. The world has been characterized as being evil. Nowhere throughout these Upanishads is there that understanding or misunderstanding. The world is not evil. The world is to be engaged in. The world is instrumental. It is through it that we get our understanding. So yes, in short, there has been this misunderstanding. How can we make the correction? We have to make the correction by understanding the dual nature of nature itself. On the one side is the transcendent aspect, and the other side is the immanent. And we can't deny the world. The world is as we see it, as we relate to it. But our misunderstanding has to be brought home, that this world is a mistake. In other words, we have to catch the gut reaction, the gut instinct about the world that we have, and catch it up to what is actually there. Modern physics at the moment is helping us in this. Because what we see is not what we get. And what we get is not what we see.
Thanks, Swami.
So Brian is telling us about a second coat. So we can see that we come in a number of different levels and phrases just to help us in our understanding about this. So if we go through all the Upanishads, we find a number of different concepts. We find the concepts of 5 sheaths. This is contained in the Taittiriya Upanishad. We have here, in this Isha Upanishad, also the idea of coverings. We find that there is also an understanding of different states of consciousness, one covering the other. We have an understanding of several different worlds, that when we uncover them and see the true nature of them, the reality is shining through. So a number of different concepts are there. It's like a painting now. On the outside, we've put, and when I say we, myself included, we've put the first coat on. Maybe when we finished here, I'll go outside and see one first coat has been put on the outside. But a second coat has to be done. Then what are we hiding? We're hiding the bricks and mortar on which the paint is put. So that when we look on the outside, it looks as if the first coat is the original thing. When we peel the layers away, we find coat after coat being removed. We come down to what is the fundamental constructional elements of the building itself. And then who lives inside? So we can use all these analogies to uncover this. And the more we do that, the more we become attached to God. We put it in a very simple way, in a devotional, religious way. The more we become attached to God, the less we are attached to the world by itself spontaneously. Similarly, the more truth that gets revealed to us, the less value we place on the things that move and are fleeting. So when we talk about detachment, it is not necessarily a process other than a discerning process. What is real and what is unreal. That's all. And detachment follows. Vairagya follows viveka. So yes, I think that is all a misunderstanding to say. We have to detach, because that can also lead to a sense of insensitivity, not being compassionate, or dismissing the world as an illusion. This is an accusation often put against Oriental religion by Abrahamic religions. You see all these Buddhists and Hindus and so on and so forth, they just dismiss the world, they become detached and dispassionate about the world. No, not true. Everywhere you look, those who have the understanding of truth, particularly those who pursue the immutable, the unchangeable, the unmanifest, those ones spontaneously dedicated to the welfare of the world. We see this mentioned in several places in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so next week what we'll do, we'll pick up from where we left off, and those who, in the meanwhile, can study from the very beginning of the issue Upanishad to where we are so far, and we'll cover the rest then as we go on. And then having covered, at least to some extent, sufficient for you to study it yourself, we'll go on to another Upanishad. We'll select another short Upanishad for your ease of understanding. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto
Thank
all.
you.